Hello guys, today I'll be talking about 10 critically mixed to negative reviewed albums in my collection. Now, of course, some albums will lean more towards mixed while others lean more towards negative, but overall you can say that all these albums are fairly divisive within the fan base and with critics too. But anyways, these are 10 albums that I randomly selected from my collection. These albums are in no particular order, but the first album I want to talk about is Hold Your Fire by Rush. I see this album towards the bottom a lot in many Rush rankings, and this album gets a lot of flack, especially with how dated it sounds and the overuse of synthesizers, and the 80s pop sound is really evident in the album. And overall, I kind of like the album. I don't think it's one of their best, but there's some good stuff on here in my opinion. And yes, again, dated, definitely you can tell it's of its time, but again, I do like some stuff on here. Force 10, definitely one of the best songs on here. Time Stand Still, which is maybe a song that's not for every fan, but I like that song. And I even like the female vocals in the song too. You have Open Secrets, which I think is maybe one of their most underrated songs. I really like that song personally. Prime Mover, I'd probably say the same thing too. I think that song is pretty underrated and pretty dang good. Definitely one of the highlights off the album for me personally. Lock and Key is also pretty good. I mean, yeah, very 80s sounding song, but I do like it. Mission's another decent song on here. High Water, not the strongest album closer, but it's okay. A lot of people give a lot of crap towards Taishan. It's probably one of their worst songs in their discography, but I don't think it's horrible. I don't think it's the worst thing ever. It's not the worst thing I've ever heard, but yeah, Hold Your Fire, it's, in my opinion, not as bad as some people make it out to be, and I actually kind of like the album. But again, not one of their best, but still, I wouldn't say it's their worst, though. But next we move on to this album here. Results May Vary. This album, if I remember correctly, has one of the lowest ratings on Metacritic. Like a 33 or 34, something like that. But yeah, when this album came out, critics were just all over it, giving it so much crap. It definitely, critically, it definitely leaned more towards negative, you could say. But yeah, often considered their worst album. And also the album didn't have Wes Borland. He left in 2001, if I remember correctly. But yeah, you had multiple session musicians during the making of the album, and I think the main person that played guitar on here was Mike Smith, who was from the band Snot. But yeah, I don't think this album is as bad as some people make it out to be honest. I do still think it's their worst, but there's some stuff on here that I do like. Eat You Alive, not gonna lie, I kind of dig that song. The lyrics are a bit sus, but I do like that song. Give Me the Mic. I've seen some people say that this is one of the highlights or one of the better songs on here, and I definitely agree. Definitely one of my favorites on here. Underneath the Gun, not a song that many fans talk about. I mean, yeah, overall the song does feel a bit more grounded, not as energetic as some of their past work. But yeah, to me it sounds a bit more grown up, a bit more mature, but I really dig that song actually. And there's some guitar work in that song that I do enjoy. I mean, maybe not guitar work that'll blow you away, but again, I think it is one of the better songs on here. Build a Bridge, yeah, it's a bit slower and not as musically intriguing as some other songs they've done, but I do still kind of like that song though. But And Almost Over is another favorite of mine on here. I do like that song. Lonely World, a bit more of a melodic, more grounded song, but I think that song is one of the best on here. Then you have Phenomenon, which is a bit more upbeat and more punchy of a Limp Bizkit song, and I think it's easily one of the best songs on here. But yeah, the album does have some good stuff, but you do have some stinkers on here, like Red Light, Green Light. Now, don't get me wrong, I like the hip-hop side of Limp Bizkit. I like In Together Now, I like Get Your Groove On, but this song does nothing for me. I think it's overall pretty lame. And then you have their cover of Behind Blue Eyes, originally done by The Who, and I think this cover is pretty lame. And I've seen some love for this cover, but honestly, I've never been a big fan of that cover. But Head for the Barricade, another decent song on here, one of the better songs in the second half. But yeah, there's some good stuff on here in my opinion. Again, not as bad as some people make it out to be in my opinion, but still their worst, I'd say. Then we move on to this album, Madness by All That Remains. Often considered one of their worst, and rightfully so. This album is pretty dang bad. It does have some redeeming values though. I do like a few of the songs. Safe House, while a bit of a generic banger, I do like it. And you know, Madness, the title track, kind of grew on me over time a little bit. I mean, it's not great, but I do like it though. Halo, one of the better songs on here, I'd say. And Trust and Believe is probably one of the best songs on here. Even though it sounds like it'd be one of the weaker B-sides from one of their earlier albums, I still think it's a decent song. But you have some of their worst songs on here, like Back to You, which is horrendous. You have their cover of the Thunder Rolls, which I've seen some love for that cover. Not a lot, but I've seen some people like that song, and I'm just not a big fan of that cover, to be honest. And I'm also not a big country fan. I really don't like country. If I'm honest, not a big fan of that song. Nothing I Can Do is also one of the weaker songs on here, I'd say. But yeah. A few decent songs in here, but overall, pretty bad album. Definitely one of the weakest. Next, we move on to this album, One Hot Minute by Red Hot Chili Peppers. So, this album, we have no John Frusciante. Instead, we have Dave Navarro, who is from Jane's Addiction. Excuse me. But in Jane's Addiction, I do like that band, but Dave Navarro, I don't think he was a good fit in this album, but he definitely helped make the album heavier, though. This is maybe their heaviest album, but still, I think it's one of their weakest. Not their worst, in my opinion. I know some people say that, but I personally disagree. There is some decent stuff on here. I do like Warped, a bit of a dark, heavy song. Also one of the singles, and definitely one of the better songs on here, I'd say. And then you have Aeroplane, which is probably my favorite song on here. If you like Warped, you'll probably like Deep Kick, pretty good song. Coffee Shop is also decent. But then things get pretty uninteresting towards the second half. Maybe a few decent moments, but overall, the first half is definitely the stronger half. But yeah, there's some decent stuff on here, but overall, definitely one of their weakest. Next, we have Born Again by Black Sabbath. So, critically, at the time of its release, it got fairly mixed reviews, but as decades later, or as time has gone on, I have seen more love towards it. But yeah, it does have its fans, but there are still some people out there that don't like it, especially with the production. Probably one of the most hated aspects of the album is the production, and yeah, I'm definitely with everyone else about the production. The production is not that great, but there's some good stuff on here. I like Trashed, which is probably the biggest song on here. Disturbing the Priest, probably one of my favorite songs on here. Kind of an underrated song. Zero the Hero and the title track are also decent songs too. But yeah, a few skippable songs on here, but overall, not their worst, I'd say. There is some good stuff on here, in my opinion. Does it deserve the hate it gets? To me, not really. I do think what people say about the production is definitely fair, but again, there's some good stuff on here, I'd say. But next, we got this album, Demolition, Judas Priest. My copy is a promotional copy, which is pretty cool, but yeah, this album and Nostradamus are easily my least favorite Judas Priest albums. With Nostradamus, it's just a chore to get through, but with this album, you get some of their worst lyrics, and you get some boring moments on here, and you have some experiments in this album that don't work. Even some moments that lean more towards nu metal, like with the album closer, Metal Messiah, which I don't know what the heck Ripper's doing in the verses, but it ain't it. It's so corny, so dated, and just so stupid. But Machine Man, probably one of the better songs on here, even though there's a few questionable lyrics on that song, or you could say cringy, to be honest, because there are a few cringy lines in that song, or just straight up corny. One on One, while a fairly repetitive song, I do kind of like it, and I think it's one of the better songs on here, but yeah, after Machine Man and One on One, the album kind of pretty much just lose my interest. It's a few decent riffs here and there once you get later into the album, but overall, this album is pretty lame and definitely one of their worst. As when it comes to which album's worse, this album or Jugulator, I think this album's worse. I'm actually a Jugulator defender. I like that album, but this album I just can't defend. It's just definitely a stinker in my opinion. But next we move on to Virtual 11 by Iron Maiden. Often considered one of the worst, and I definitely agree. Honestly, the only songs on here that are worth returning to are Future Real and The Klansman. To me, the only songs you could say are strong on here. I mean, Como Estás, Amigos is okay. Same with Lightning Strikes Twice, it's okay, but nothing to write home about. But you do have The Abomination, The Angel and the Gambler. But, I mean, at least with The Angel and the Gambler, I mean, with that song, it doesn't make me mad, but it is kind of a chore to get through, though, because of how long it is. But, I don't know. And, yeah, it's also very repetitive, too. The song that definitely needed trimming, but as for the rest of the album, When Two Worlds Collide, Educated Fool, Don't Look to the Eyes of a Stranger, those songs just have never really left much of an impression on me, to be honest. That album's just, those songs are kind of just meh to me, and probably some of their least interesting songs in their discography. But yeah, this album, definitely the worst in my opinion. But next we move on to Untitled by Korn. This is one of those albums that I've actually changed my mind on, because for the longest time I was really not a big fan of the album, but I actually don't mind the album as much now. I do think it's one of their worst, but there's some good stuff on here. I do think it starts off strong with Starting Over. The intro, honestly, is a waste of time, but once you get to Starting Over, things start to get interesting. But yeah, Bitch We Got a Problem, definitely another highlight for me off the album. You know, Evolution, and the singles off the album I think are pretty good. Evolution and Hold On, those are pretty good songs. Those are songs I'd defend. But you get to the second half and the album does get pretty interesting. But Innocent Bystander is a pretty good song. Kind of an underrated song, I'd say. Probably has some of the heavier moments of the album in it, but yeah, there's some decent stuff on here, but overall, not that great of an album. Definitely one of their weakest. But again, some redeeming values. Next, we move on to an album that personally, for me, really disappointed me when it came out. And it's One More Light by Linkin Park. So, this album, they went pop, and I'm not a big pop guy, and there's some pop out there that I don't mind. I mean, of course, Michael Jackson, definitely one of the more respectable stars in pop music, and I even like some of his stuff, but when Linkin Park went pop on this album, it just didn't work for me. Honestly, the only decent songs on here are Talking to Myself and the title track, even though nowadays it's maybe a bit more harder to listen to the title track, especially when you think about what happened to Chester, rest in peace. Probably one of my favorite vocalists of all time. His range, his voice in general. I just love that guy's voice, and it's definitely unfortunate that we lost him. But yeah, this album, and I've seen some people after the release or later on grew to like the album, but for me, I'm still not a big fan of the album overall. Now, finally, we're going to move on to the final album here. Saint Anger. Definitely an obvious choice. I mean, how can you talk about critically hated or critically mixed albums without mentioning this album? And believe it or not, I think this album is not as bad as some people make it out to be, but it does have some stinkers on here, like Shoot Me Again, which is probably the worst song on here, and definitely overstays its welcome. And overstaying its welcome is definitely a big criticism I have for many of the songs on here, like with All Within My Hands and Invisible Kid. But at least with Invisible Kid, while the lyrics are not that great, at least I think the song has some decent riffs and has some interesting moments. I like Invisible Kid, even though it does definitely overstay its welcome, but Frantic, probably my favorite song on here. Yes, the drum snare on the album, pretty annoying, but as I've given the album more and more listens over time, I've grown to not mind the drum snare as much, but still not a great snare sound though. Then you have the raw production, which was what they were going for, but still, again, not the best production, which is pretty disappointing, especially when you remember who was producing the album, Bob Rock. But also the title track, yeah, lyrically, definitely not that great, but I do think it's one of the better songs on here. And The Unnamed Feeling, I think many people would agree with me on this, that this is one of the best songs on here, one of the better songs. The verses feel like they're leaning a little bit into nu metal territory, a little bit overall in terms of its sound, a little bit, at least to me, it sounds a little bit nu metal-ish, but I like Unnamed Feeling, definitely one of the best songs on here. And Sweet Amber, I think, has some pretty sweet riffs on it. Really good song, and definitely one of the best songs on here. But yeah, definitely a flawed album, but I do think it has some redeeming values. There's some decent stuff on here. Anyways, those are my 10 albums. Let me know your thoughts on these 10 albums. Let me know if you can think of other albums and all that good stuff. But anyways, thanks for watching. Please leave a comment, like, subscribe. Have a nice day, and take care.